during this expedition, the Chaco project, they discovered 3,600 sites in the canyon alone, stemming from all the way from those hunter-gatherers through the winter weather era. And then they went up and around and discovered that there was at least 30,000, maybe as many as 90,000 square miles around us that had great houses and roads. They discovered a road system that connected, we found over 200 great houses and roads that connected many of those. And here is a graphic of some of the roads coming into the canyon. As I said before, they had lots of stuff from there, including not only those the corn and the shell, things like copper bells and live birds. They brought live macaw and parrots. And just recently they did some experiments on some of the potsherds from an area over there and found that there was chocolate in them. So chocolate was coming up as well. From the north, we have Pueblo Alto and New Alto above us, and there's all sorts of roads coming into there, and then down here into the canyon. Somewhere right over there was an access down here. There was a road going right under where we are, one right in front, a road going across the way, and it's kind of dark right now, but if you look right across and a little to the left, there's a mound with a wall on it, and that's Casa Rinconada. And then way up top you may see a little bit, I don't know if that's the ruins or not, but Cincleto is up there, and there was roads up there. So in 1980, they changed the name from Chaco Canyon National Monument to Chaco Culture National Historical Park. And we got several outlying sites which you can also go visit if you've got a good car and some time and some courage. Because the roads are not all that great. And they also discovered that no, the climate had not changed that much, that there were not huge forests in here. They did mineral analysis of a lot of the beams that were used for the roofs and found out that most of them, the vast majority of them, came from 50 to 60 miles away, either to the south at Mount Taylor or to the west at the Chusca Mountains. How did they get them here? Well, we're not sure. They had no wheels. They did have domesticated turkeys. Can't quite see that happening.
Did they have mules at all?
They didn't have mules, they didn't have horses. They did have dogs, but they didn't have wheels.
So they did do travelers?
And they don't have any evidence of dragging.
Oh, they don't carry sleds.
Yeah. So the way I talked to somebody who had just visited Acoma Pueblo, and he had heard down there that the way they did it was they yoked folks together and actually carried the things in relays, and they were actually considered somewhat sacred, so they didn't want them to touch the ground. So just imagine groups of fellows coming in the South Road with big logs in between them.
How was the society set up? Did they have slaves?
We have no idea, and there is a lot of speculation, and that is one of them. I have heard that you have, okay, we got 4 different language groupings coming out of here, so this is not one culture. We got many different groups living here together, and even the Navajo have a story about one of their clans living here during the very end of the Puebloans. So this was a very complex and different society. And some of those folks say that this was the most wonderful place to be in the entire world, and it was a golden age, and they discovered a lot about themselves and before they had to move on. And other folks say this was the darkest place they'd ever been, and they were escaping from here, and they never wanted to have it happen again. So it could be that those folks were actually enslaved. Some folks think, no, this was actually the government, the seat of government, and it was essentially egalitarian. And so maybe you'd have the folks, I don't know if you can see, but over on that side there's also a lot of little mounds that have masonry coming out of them. And there's hundreds of these little pueblos all over that side and some on this side as well, where there's more evidence of folks living. So they're thinking maybe they lived in the small pueblos and came to work here. And this was government offices and museums kind of a thing where you wouldn't live. Or maybe this was the center of religion. So we're in Vatican City. And you have a few priests living here with their servants. And the only time you get massive amounts of people is whenever all the faithful are coming in from the thousands of miles around us.
I guess this is what somebody was saying, something about the UFOs.
Well, like I say, we have not yet found any evidence of that. If you do, please let us know, and we'll alert the media.
But if they were in contact with the Mesoamericans had a hierarchy, you know, the royalty and all
It's
that
highly
stuff,
possible that that was happening here as well. But and in fact, someone asked about burials, and there were two burials that were special burials that were found in the rooms over there. In the whole canyon, there were only about 300 burials found, and some of those burials are just a few bones. But here in Pueblo Bonito, we did find one room with a series of burials. Two of the skeletons were larger than normal. The norm was about 5'6", and they were closer to 6 feet. And their skeleton showed evidence of not having as hard a life and being better fed and less worked. And they were wearing turquoise capes. And they had other folks that were buried with them, seemingly in subordinate types of roles. And that was one of the places where those pots were found. In fact, they did a carbon dating of the bones and found they dated very early, from at least 860, possibly back as far as 820. So that would have predated the first building here, or been here very early. And the pottery that was discovered with them went through the entire time period this place was
maybe
inhabited.
it was a shrine.
Yeah, so maybe this was
It was bones
a
of the
shrine.
saints.
Yeah, exactly. Or that was, you know, George Washington, and they were. This was the museum and the tomb. But we don't know because they didn't leave any written records, and the descendants ain't talking, if they know. Which is not too surprising considering how they were treated through the centuries, both by the Spaniards and us. Because whenever we got information about them, we used it to bad purposes and made them regret it. So, not too surprising. Anyway, they did have plenty to eat. They were not just subsistence. They grew corn and beans and squash. They also did gathering. They had things like wild onions, wild carrots, wild spinach. They had the domesticated turkeys, although there's indication that those were more for their feathers because they made capes and blankets out of those. And the dogs, and those, there are some ceremonial burials of dogs, so they're thinking perhaps their relationship with the dog was similar to ours. They were similarly honored. But they did go hunting for deer and elk and pronghorn. And after they started doing agriculture, they started getting pests. And so they started trapping and eating the pests. And they liked cottontail and prairie dog. And there were a lot of mice skeletons, but the thought is that they weren't actually eating those. They were just killing them. So a varied diet. And what else? Any other questions? I saw hands.
What was an average lifespan?
Average lifespan, if you made it to 40, you were doing really well. If you made it to 50, that was really old.
Any evidence of medicinal, things used for medicinal purposes?
I don't know the answer to that question. That's a really good question. First time anyone's asked that.
I'll give you my email.
Okay. And yeah, ask at the visitor center.
Okay.
Of course, I'll be the only one there in a couple hours.
What did they use for sanitation facilities?
I don't know. We have found trash middens in some of the rooms. I don't think that was their, like they wouldn't have been living in their own trash, but but they might have, after they had the rooms and didn't need them, they could have put the trash there. And they did not find evidence for thousands of people living here. They found fairly few areas that looked like housing, with hearths and household furnishings like those sandals and mats and things like that. And where they were was on the top level as you cascaded down into the plaza. Picture this. This is 3 acres, this whole building. And you would have had street level down in the plaza, and you would have come up to either 4 or 5 stories on the top. And the bottom stories would not have been well ventilated and would have been a pain to get to. So they're thinking those were maybe storage, or some of them might even have just been structural. So the amount of people that were living here went down to maybe 50 to 100 full-time people. And then that influx of folks from time to time.
Could they have been storing things like food in there for people who were working on, who were brought in at various times to work on it? Because I read some place where they talked about thinking this was a sacred site. And so people would come here, it's about the idea of theology, people would come here to work because if it was sacred, you might get some good merit out of it or something.
Yeah, and that's highly possible.
There
are some rooms.
No reason.
Yeah, there are some rooms that have kind of a slanted inset into the doors. And one of the archaeologists came by a couple of weeks ago, and he said that the reason, and the doors are kind of smaller than the norm, and he was saying that those were slanted so you could put boards on them, and you could store stuff behind and then seal it well against the pests. So it's highly possible this was storage. They wouldn't have grown a whole lot here because, you know, they didn't have as much water. And they didn't do a lot of pottery here because they didn't have the wood to fire it with. But there was plenty of pottery and plenty of stuff coming in. A lot of the food even seems to have been brought in. So having the faithful bring in the stuff, that's highly possible.
Could they have fed the faithful, had the rooms for the faithful to stay when they were here, and then fed them?
It's
so that the
possible.
storage could have been used for times when they would know that they would be having ceremonies.
Yeah, and that's highly possible.
But you don't know, because
Yeah.
you don't know no written
Did you
records.
have another question? Oh, yeah. No. Okay. Well, let's go down here. There's a bit of shade on